Welcome, 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 everybody, to another gathering When Black Women Gather. My name is Helen Higginbotham. I'm the founder of this organization, and I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, why we're here, what we're doing. Just want to thank everybody for coming. Remind you that we are recording and it will be released on YouTube. So if you don't want your face to be seen or whatever your case may be, now is the time for you to change your status. I'm asking if you can to indicate in your name tag where you're from, because that'll help us just to see who's on the call. So let me first tell you that I have a few women working with me. I don't know if everybody has shown up yet, but let me just tell you who they are. They are my co-hosts and they will be helping me to keep order in the room. They will be helping me with the chats. They will help me with um, muting people, removing people. We've never had to do that, but there's always a time. And that would be BB Murphy, Kilthea Roberts, Laura Bryant, Michelle Burgess, Linda McDonald Carter, Michelle Cotton Laws, and Nana I'm messing up her name. Dagadu. Oh, I don't know if I've ever said that. Hey, Nana. But anyway, just quickly about When Black Women Gather. I started this about 2010, and I was not as diligent about it as I am now since COVID. But we would meet in person, which is always my preference. And we would do brunches. We would watch Black films and discuss them. And um, it was just an opportunity for Black women to come together in a safe place where we could be ourselves, where we were understood. We didn't have to explain what we were thinking or saying or what have you. Everybody kind of got it. And it was a place for us to decompress and understand one another, gain strength from one another, be inspired by one another. And then the COVID hit, and we started meeting online. And I have to tell you that we are at over 150 gatherings we've been having online. And the way it started was, it was March. I was home going crazy because I'm very much an extrovert. And I didn't even know what Zoom was. I sent out an SOS. Does anybody want to get on this call just to see? We were to see each other. And we were so happy to see one another. It was like 20 women on that call. And it turned into an every Sunday event where it was rare that we would have less than 100 women on the call, which was quite interesting. And we talked about everything, and we had all kinds of guests. Most times it was just us talking amongst ourselves, but we've had Nikki Giovanni, we've had Sonia Sanchez, Tina Lifford, um, lots of people, Greg Carr. Those of you who are in Nubia, I hope you are. If there's some Nubian people on here. So we just had a wide range of people who would come and meet with us. And then I started having quarterly conversations with white women. And Unfortunately, I've been bad. We haven't had one in a while. But in light of all this happening around us right now, especially politically, I wanted us to start having these conversations again. So I got the bright idea to invite Dr. DiAngelo, and I'm so happy that she accepted. So that's where we are today. So in the quarterly, in addition to the quarterly discussions with white women, I'm going to shout out some of the organizations that we've collaborated with. I don't know if Elizabeth Voss is here, but we met with her and the Mid Suffolk County and Now chapter. I hope my good friend Carolyn Peters Eckel is here. She's always supporting anything that we do, and she's a part of the Southampton Friends meetings. And then The Camden County League of Women Voters. Thank you, Claudia, for that connection. And I have to acknowledge Share My Journey with Rebecca Cohen and Cheryl Gittens from Be Elevated Coaching. The three of us have done some things together. So it's real important that we continue to have these conversations, like I said, especially now. Going forward, I want us until at least until the election that we're meeting monthly. And it's not just Black and white women, it's just like women in general, because if we don't save this nation, I'm not sure who's going to. So we're going to talk about that throughout the rest of the month. Up until the election. So also, let's see, what did I want to say? So why are we here today? Today we're honored to have Dr. Robin DiAngelo. She is the acclaimed author of the book White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. Um, Her timing on this book, which she's going to talk to us about, is just interesting because she's writing it in, well, it's released in 2018. She'll tell us when she was writing it. And this is pre George Floyd, right? So it was already in full steam ahead before that incident happened. So now I want us to talk. We see what's happening. I just read this morning that Microsoft discontinued their DEI program. So I want us to talk today about after the fragility, post George Floyd, right? Um, there was this reckoning that that somehow there was a racial reckoning happening in the United States, and specifically giving voice to anti-Black racism, which is what I love about Dr. DiAngelo's book, because for me, her book was like, and I've shared this with her, it was like a letter written by a white woman to white people for all the rest of us to read. And, there were lots of aha moments for us in that book. And I can't wait for us to get her into talking to her about it. I'm just all over the place. Anyway, so let me say this. So there's a shift happening, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to share with you the rules of engagement. I'm going to introduce Dr. DiAngelo, and then we're going to dive right into the conversation. I suspect that we're going to have a really large group today, so I'm encouraging you to please rely on the chats. These conversations are always interactive. Those of you who have been on my conversations before, and we do want you to be able to engage Dr. DiAngelo and one another as we're going along, but there will be no speeches. And I know that's hard. That's really hard. We're going to give people a minute and a half at the most, no speech, ask a question and we're going to keep it moving. And my co-host will help me to keep everybody on place with that so that we don't go off. Again, remember, we are recording. No one else is authorized to record this meeting. So I don't think you can without my permission. So if you're recording through some other means, it is without authority. The chats are available. I will leave them accessible to you. You can copy the chats, do your thing. If you have stuff going on in your own world, drop it there. So the rules of engagement. I have what are called Higgieisms. And my big one is respect is guaranteed, comfort is not. That's kind of self-explanatory. We are where we are because we're so focused on comfort. Whose comfort? Everybody's comfort is an issue. If no, everybody's important. Everybody's comfort matters, or nobody's comfort matters. In this situation, because we're going to be open and candid and honest, we want you to just do that and be respectful. There is no such thing as an uncomfortable or difficult conversation. They're likely necessary conversations, so that's what we're going to have here. It is not required that you be politically correct, right? Because we make a lot of assumptions in political correctness, and we assume that we know what somebody else is thinking. We don't know what somebody else is thinking. Go ahead, ask your question, use the email rule, think about it, because, it's easy to come on here and be rude. We don't accept that. There's no rudeness in this circle, and we will mute you or remove you, which I said we've never done before, but we will. But think about what you want to say. Consider your audience. You want to be heard. So frame it in a way that, you can be heard, not insulting. There will be no harassing, no bullying, no name calling. Gauge yourself. Don't discard any question. Just rephrase it. Think about it, rephrase it, and say it in a way that you can be heard and that it won't come across offensive to someone. And the hostesses will decide what's inappropriate. So keep that in mind too. Keep yourselves on mute while the call is going on. Use the chats generously. One person is to speak at a time if we get to that part. And please, I don't think there's anybody on the phone because I usually let people on the phone, but I kind of took that off here, but people will call in, and I'll ask my co-host to make sure that we grab folks on the phone. So right now, I'm going to bring our guests on screen with me. Yay. Hey.
Hi.
How are you? So I just have to.
I'm well. I mean, as well as can be given the terror of the times.
Yeah. This is true. This is true. And I just have to thank you again. You've been very gracious accepting my invitation, and everybody here is appreciative of having you here. So quickly I'm going to introduce you, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you wrote the book, what was going on then, and eventually our conversation will talk about what's happening now. So real quickly, Dr. DiAngelo is an affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. In addition, she holds 2 honorary doctorates. She is a 2-time winner of the Student's Choice Award for Educator of the Year at the University of Washington School of Social Work. She has numerous publications and books. In 2011, she coined the term white fragility in an academic article which has influenced the international dialogue on race. Her book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, has been translated into 13 languages and adapted for young adults. Her follow-up book, Nice Racism, How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm, was released in June 2021. Her work and interviews have been featured on CBS, MSNBC, The New York Times, The Guardian, the BBC, NPR, and PBS, among many other forums. In addition to her academic work, Dr. DiAngelo has been a consultant and educator for over 25 years on issues of racial and social justice. It is our honor to have her gathering with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. DiAngelo to When Black Women Gather as we discuss After the Fragility.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Most of what I do when I'm talking about racism in a public forum is strategic, and I might not always get the strategy right by everybody, but I do think about it. And so one of the strategies is the credibility that my PhD grants me. But now that we have established that, please call me Robin. Okay. Everybody can just call me Robin. I think with this particular audience, it's not as important that we establish that credibility, because likely I will not be as challenging as I might be for a primarily white audience that thinks they don't have anything more to learn about race or racism. So thank you. So would you like me to just start by how I came to write the book?
Yeah, just tell us about, even the paper. I mean, what made you
Yeah.
you're definitely ahead of the ball on this whole conversation. So, the timing of
Well,
it all. Yes.
in some really foundational ways, there's nothing special about me. I'm a classic white liberal who grew up in segregation like most white people, absorbed a deep anti-Blackness, and yet saw myself as open-minded and not racist, a pretty kind of classic, clueless white person who didn't know that they were clueless. And I went to college late in life. I have a poor and working class background, so I was a non-traditional student. I graduated with a degree in sociology, didn't know what I could do for a living, and came across a job called diversity trainer. So this was the early 90s, and I had never heard of a diversity trainer. But when I read the description, I thought, okay, that just sounds like the coolest job ever. You're going to go into the workplace and you're going to help other people become open-minded like you. I was, of course, in for the most profound learning of my entire life on several levels. And the first one is that, no, I wasn't going to teach anyone to be open-minded like myself. And second, it wasn't going to be fun. So it was a lot like a fish out of water experience. So the thing that happened was, and maybe I should pause and just say, some people may have heard me tell this background before, but if you haven't, the social services department for the state of Washington, so the welfare department in the state of Washington, was sued for racial discrimination in the early 90s. And contrary to, white mythology, it's really hard to win a racial discrimination lawsuit because you have to prove intent, which pretty much is impossible to prove. No one's going to admit it. But they were found to be way out of compliance. And so they lost the lawsuit. And so as part of the settlement, the federal government mandated that every single employee in the state of Washington that worked for the welfare department, so about 5,000 employees, had to have 16 hours of mandated diversity training. So just let those words seep in. 16 hours mandated, every employee. And many of these offices across the state were 100% white.
And what year is this?
This was
19?
it was early 90s. I got this job in around 93.
Yeah.
So they hired a company to put a training together, and then this company put a call out, and they hired roughly 40 trainers to fan out across the state. And the plan was to put us in interracial teams of 2 and then send us out. So the first thing that had to happen was the 5-day train the trainer. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever had my racial worldview challenged. I actually wouldn't have even been able to tell you I had a racial worldview, right? I was just, individual. And I'm in a room with 50% are.
And that's the T.
Okay, and I think someone needs a mute. Is that?
Yeah, I'm trying to see who it is. Can you all help me with this? You co-hosts, I'm trying to see who it is. Please mute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Each part of the story that I'm telling it is really deliberate in the sense of kind of showing the dynamics, right? Like, so first of all, I'm in a room that's 50% people of color. That's a rare experience for a white person. And they are challenging the way we see ourselves in the world. And that's definitely a rare experience for a white person, particularly back in the 90s, right? This is the era of color blindness, right? Let's just profess that we don't see color. And I'll never forget the afternoon of the first day when the white people pretty much turned to the people of color and said, okay, this is the part where you teach us about racism. And they looked back at us and said, basically, oh, hell no, that's not our job. I mean, think about it. I would have to say I wasn't qualified if I needed to turn to my fellow colleagues and ask them to teach me the content of the job, right? But that kind of consciousness, right? I was raised to see race as what you had, Helen, not what I had. So if we're going to be talking about it, we'll be talking about you, right? Not me. And so I'm innocent. I'm outside of it. You teach me what your experience is. I'll be sad about it. I'll be arrogant about it too. I'll decide what of what you're telling me is legitimate and what I really don't buy or believe, right? That's kind of a classic way that white people engage. And then I'll just be glad that I don't do any of those things and I'm not part of the problem. And, that's kind of what we were expecting. And I'll never forget, in the middle of this kind of arguing, this white woman calls out into the room, all the white racists, raise your hand. And a whole bunch of white people raised their hand, but I didn't. And I remember thinking, oh, hey, I'm not going to raise my hand. I'm racist. Thinking that I was showing everybody that I was the good one, right? But what I was showing everybody is that I didn't understand what racism was, that I wasn't self-aware, that I didn't understand implicit bias, right? That I was a clueless, classic white liberal. So that was just day one. We got through 5 days of that, and then we went out into the field, and I would be in rooms that were 100% white, and white people would be bitterly complaining that white people couldn't get jobs anymore. The story. And so just at first I was a bit like a deer in headlights, right? But over time it became so scripted and so predictable that I could literally say, I know what's coming next, right? And then I was able to kind of get under and say, well, what is the foundational framework, right? That would cause people to respond in this way. For example, if I see myself as an individual, right, and you try to say that my whiteness has meaning, then I'm going to feel offended. Like you don't know me. How could you say anything about me if you don't know me? Right. And so you go, oh, okay. So now we need to talk about individualism and we need to have people understand. Or if I use the fact that you are my friend as my evidence that I'm not racist, then what must my definition of a racist be? Well, it would be somebody who could never have a Black person as a friend. And I'm going to bet, well, I don't have to ask your group, but I often say, do you have any white people in your life who you know and love dearly and who on occasion say and do racially hurtful things? Of course you do, right? Because we all have it. So I just got better and better at kind of breaking it down in a way that was recognizable for white people. I want to be really clear that I couldn't even begin to do that if I didn't have years of mentorship from the Black people and other people of color that I worked with. There's no question that about that for me, that white people cannot understand racism, cannot understand our own racism if we're not learning and taking leadership from Black people and other people of color. But I do have a piece of it that you don't have, right? I'm an insider to it. And I can speak to it in a way that other white people just can't deny because it's a shared experience. And so that's what I think I bring that complements and is, works together with what you bring. I went on to get my PhD after years of doing this training and realizing that I had had an amazing opportunity that most white people don't have, which is every single day for a living, walking into rooms and trying to talk to primarily white people about racism and doing that side by side, often with a Black person, and witnessing their experience, hearing their experience, building relationship with them. And so my PhD actually is in whiteness studies. And all I've ever written about pretty much is everyday white racism, trying to make it recognizable for fellow white people so that we can stop this harm and this complicity. So white fragility was actually just one of many articles that I had written, just to capture, not sometimes people just hear that name and they think that what I'm saying is white people are really delicate. I think we're delicate the way a bomb is delicate, right? Fragile the way a bomb is fragile. Like you better hold it real careful because it's going to explode very easily and you will get hurt and so will everybody around you, right? So it's that kind of barely scratch on the surface and out comes a lot of, rage, resentment, hurt feelings. And all of that functions as a way, I think, to police you into not challenging us, right? Making it so punitive and so miserable for you to do that most of the time you'll just say, not today. And so it's a very, I think, effective form of social control. It doesn't have to be conscious. It's often not conscious, but it's also not benign and it's not innocent. So somebody quoted one day in the newspaper from that article that I didn't think anybody ever read, and it went viral. It kind of exploded worldwide. And I began to get emails literally from around the world from people saying, you have put language to my experience, either on the receiving end or on the perpetrating end. And so I knew that it would be useful for people. The original article is real academic speak because that's what you're trained to do, write in a way that's so convoluted that it's difficult to understand, and then you look smart, grad school. I wanted to take it out of academia and put it into the mainstream, and so I turned it into the book, and that was in 2018. It did debut on the New York Times bestseller list because that concept had already been out in the culture and was, and then during the summer of 2020, it was still on that chart, but it went up and down. And I just make that point because I've read lots of folks who say that in the summer of 2020, that's when it became popular, and it had been out quite a while. And that's important to me because sometimes I'm put forth as if I was an opportunist who took advantage of a
Not
moment.
at all. I was actually expected to, and that's why we want to talk about the timing of this, because I was expected to see you in New York before the and it got canceled. So
Yeah.
pre-pandemic, it's certainly pre George Floyd. So yeah, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I mean, I think I can stop there. I think I kind of brought you up to the moment, and I'll let you guide me with whatever you'd like me to expound on or
So I was
expand.
glad that you and folks, please, drop stuff in the chats. And if you have a burning question, use the apparatus at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. I'll we'll entertain your questions. And certainly my co-hosts, we've talked about this, and some of you had great questions, so please chime in. So I was glad that you touched on, I looked up the meaning of the word fragility, right? And it means vulnerable, it means breakable. It's, all these gentle things. And so when you and I spoke, I asked you, and I'll ask you now in front of everyone else, why did you use the word fragile, fragility? And then you already, I love that you shared the mom part. So yes, what made you
Like
choose that word?
that really captured it. It just came out of my mouth in a moment of frustration with just yet again, I mean, some conversation and some white person falling apart and bursting into tears or storming out of the room. And it's just like, God, it's just like we can't handle anything. It just feels like the slightest challenge to our self identity, our sense of ourselves as outside of this, and we fall apart in ways that, of course, again, are very punitive and punishing. So yeah, that it doesn't mean vulnerable for sure. And
Yeah,
just well, no, I don't tend to look at the chat because it does distract me. So if you were to write
I know.
something in
I'm
there,
trying. I'm trying to leave it to my co-host, but it's hard for me not to
it's
look
okay.
at it. So.
I'll trust the folks to feed it to me, Helen and
Yes, yes. Let me before we get away from this one, and I'm just going to go back and forth here since it's here.
yeah.
How successful are you at getting white women to see their areas of racism?
It's mixed. I mean, I would say overall I have been very effective. I mean, there's the book it spent 3 years on that list. It's been translated. I know that I get emails every day from people who say you changed my life or you opened my eyes. And it's a lot like water dripping on a rock. Reading one book is not going to end your conditioning. Um, White people in a lot of ways it's glacial to get us to move, right? I mean, those of us on the call that have been working in organizations, it just feels like it just like pushing uphill to get any kind of change. So it um within that reality, I think that I've been effective. I also am really clear that no one way could ever be effective for everybody, that there are people who my directness in naming it is what just did it for them, and there'll be other people that directness is what shut them down. And I can only do what is my style, bring to the table my particular gift. And I think it's been successful overall. But just the other day, and this connects a little bit to you asking why I picked the word fragile. I co-lead a white affinity group, which is where a group of white people meet regularly to look at our racism and to deal with it and challenge it in a way that doesn't harm other people having to bear witness to that. And I worked with a white woman around a story she told, kind of a story she told about an early racial impression, and trying to help her to see that it was actually a pretty problematic story. And without any analysis, she was just reinforcing for everybody some pretty problematic anti-Black images. She was fine. She found it really helpful. She understood why the story was problematic. But one of the other white women thought, was upset. I had shamed her. Just there's so much protection that white people do, um, white solidarity, right? So it's sometimes you're thinking, I couldn't have been any more compassionate. But the bottom line is, to give a white person feedback about racism is just, it's breaking a taboo. And if you haven't built any kind of stamina, and you've never challenged this idea that racism is a simple formula: racist, not racist, bad, good. That's how white people are taught to think about racism. I'm good, I'm not racist. So if you try to help me see something I have inadvertently said or done that certainly, if nothing else, protects racism, I'm going to hear that as, you just said I was an immoral person, and now I have to defend my character. I don't think we can get there unless we change what we understand racism is. When we understand it as a system, then we're actually grateful. Thank you for helping me see this.
Right.
I want to see this. I care to see this so that I can stop engaging in it. And I needed your help.
Yeah. I love when you said that to for a non-white person to speak to a white person about their experience of their racism, or just the experience of how they're treated or perceived, that the response is damning to the person who does, who dares to do that, and that it's a form of social control. Um, so, the topic of our conversation today is after the fragility. And the reason I said after the fragility is because where are we, right? After your book, after George Floyd, after the racial awakening, reckoning, what company didn't hire a DEI officer, right? Everybody wanted to be woke and everybody was on the same page. So clearly we're seeing a shift. So let's talk about the shift, why we're seeing, what in your perception, why we're seeing the shift. And so everybody on this call is probably a quote unquote liberal of some sort, right? The people who need to have this conversation are probably not on this call, right? The people who are surely to get angry. So how do we move the needle for people who are on this call, who do think that they're allies, who um, think that they're moving in the right direction, but they're not ready to really look at themselves inwardly? And you have the good races and the bad racism. If I call you the N word, I'm a bad person. But if I just don't give you a job or don't give you the same raise or whatever, that's not really racism. So there's a lot of questions, but
There was, that's why I took some notes. We have to add after Obama, right? Well, we had Obama, so then
oh
racism was
yeah,
over. And we had
post-racial.
it seems to be always something. So let me just say that I actually think all white people need to have this conversation, even myself, even the people on the call. I'm not outside of anything I'm talking about. I'm really clear that I have skills that I did not come naturally to me through the way I was raised. I have authentic cross-racial relationships I never would have had without doing this work. So we can get better, if you will, but we're never going to be done, right? And I actually think white liberal, I've said this before, this is one of the more controversial things I say, that I think white progressives cause the most daily harm across race.
Can you say that again, please?
I think white
I
progressives cause the most daily harm across
right.
race. I have had so many Black people say to me, give me the old school, in your face, the stereotype of the racist, because I know where they're coming from. I know how to protect myself. Most Black folks are not hanging out with that, old school racist. They're hanging out with me, their coworkers. We are the ones that send you home exhausted. And exhaustion is the theme I hear over and over from Black people around their white friends. I think to the degree that I think I'm the one that gets it, like the first question I'm going to ask is, how do I tell somebody else about theirs? I'm going to put all my energy into defending myself, because you must see me the way I see myself, which is I'm not the problem. That's why I don't say I'm an ally. That's for you to determine. That's not for me. And we talked a little bit about men on the call. I was listening. I often ask, have you ever seen a man wearing a t-shirt or something that says, this is what a feminist looks like? You know, some version of that. And I always have to look, we don't see it very often, but I have seen it before. And I always have two thoughts like, wow, that's a pretty brave t-shirt for a man to wear. That's thought number one. Thought number two is, yeah, I'll be the judge of how much of a feminist you are, brother. Right? Like how many men who think they're feminist, you know, that's not how we experience them. So that we all need humility. Do you know about the bear test? There's a thing going around, a meme going around on TikTok or something.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead. White
Where,
women are very upset about that, but go ahead. Tell
yeah,
everybody about the test.
all right. So you just basically say you're in the woods and you ask a woman, she's in the woods all alone. Would she rather come across a bear or a man? And many women say, I'll rather come across a bear, okay, than a man alone in the woods. Okay. So then a Black woman posed this to other Black women. You walk into a conference room at work. Would you rather see a white man sitting there or a white woman? And pretty overwhelmingly, Black women said, I'd rather see a white man. Mm-hmm. And somebody, a Black woman on TikTok put it like this. This really helped me. Yeah, the white whisper, somebody wrote in there. I'd rather face a wolf than a wolf in sheep's clothing. Or a wolf that doesn't know that they're a wolf, right? So I don't think white women have more racism, but our gender socialization causes it to come out in often more passive aggressive ways that can be harder to get your hands on. And it can make us a little more slippery and treacherous. Okay. But you wanted me to talk about the shift. So I can pause if in case you want to pick up anything that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the bear thing, and you know, and it gives me an opportunity too to say why I hold this conversation between Black women and white women. There is definitely a schism between us, and we don't talk about it, right? And there is, you know, there are some really predefined notions about who drives the car, right? In your book you talk about even when a Black woman finds herself, or Black people find themselves in a position of authority over a white person, there's pushback. So, and I'm glad that you talked about the whole ally thing because white women and one of the calls that I did, I love the calls that I've done with the white women on white women around this situation. And one was called a long overdue conversation between Black women and white women. And it was so raw. We were just so open and so honest with one another. And we talked about the whole ally thing and what makes you an ally. How do you show up as an ally? And who gets to decide? Because, you know, people they claim to be an ally, but you know, by whose determination? Don't I get to say whether you're an ally? I get to decide how I received the way that you showed up or didn't show up for me. So I appreciate that you said that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the shift because you know, we know what's happening in Florida and Texas
Ooh,
and you know the hardcore conservative places. But there's a lot more going on in this country that goes beyond the hardcore conservative folks. So let's talk about
Helen,
the shift.
Helen, if I may, before we switch topics, there was a question because I had the same exact question for Robin. It was talk more about some examples of white liberals causing harm. I had the same question before we shift on. It was in the chat. If we could just address that one.
Well, okay. So I think it's useful to think about it as not so much racist per se, like this thing I said or did is racist. I think about it as it protects racism, it upholds racism. And in that way, it is part of a racist system. So keep that in mind when I talk about some of the moves that we make. And if nothing else, they're maddening and they're frustrating, and that's exhausting. And it's, you know, credentialing is one of the things we do, and that's the word that I use, or the term that I use, for all the evidence that white people will offer up to establish immediately that they're not racist, right? So within 30 seconds of me meeting Helen, I need her to know right away I'm married to a Black man. And by the way, I'm not married to a Black man. I'm giving that as an example.
Okay, but
I'm sure,
but the whole thing, I'm from Canada. Where does that come from? I was like, really?
yeah.
So
Or
if you read the
I'm
book,
from
she gives us a whole list of things, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, just the kind. I'm a minority myself. I marched in the 60s. I was in Teach for America. Just my best friend is Black. My
I'm
roommate, my
married
kids.
to a Black guy. That's a big one. Does not mean you're not racist. Please,
Or how about
ladies.
my second cousin is married to a Black man? I'm like, it doesn't matter how much I have to reach back. And I used to co-lead with a woman named Erin Trent Johnson, a Black woman, and she would say, when I hear a white person giving, some form of this evidence to establish with me immediately that they're supposedly not racist, I'm thinking three things. One, this person doesn't understand systemic racism. This person is not self-aware, and this is a dangerous white person, in fact, because this is a person who will deny my reality,
Yeah.
who will deny their impact on me, who will focus on their intentions rather than their impact. This is someone I can't actually be authentic with. So we're not actually establishing what we think we're establishing when we, give these kind of ridiculous credentials, right? Let me actually, while I'm thinking, Helen, do you have some examples of moves? I think of it as moves that white progressive people make that are racially problematic for you.
Um, I think saying that claiming themselves to be allies, that's a big one for me because I get to decide that. Um, I think when we talk about moving beyond the work, when people say I'm done the work, and I love when I mention that to you. I said, if I hear another woman tell me I've done the work, what was your response? Do you remember?
No, do you?
I do, I do. You said the work, and anybody who says that hasn't, the work is never done. There is no done. The work is never done. So anybody who says that has not done the work. Um, yeah, so declaring yourself, not allowing me to speak. There's this tone policing of Black women, where they'll say, it's not, if I tell Black women to come off mute and I just say, it's not what you say, please somebody come off mute. What's the response to that? It's not what you
It's how
say.
you say it. It's how you say it. Say
Oh
it.
and of course we know the tears. And of course, when people use words like I'm afraid, you're afraid of me because of what? And it feeds right into the angry Black woman stereotype. But a nice young woman who I would never call out by name was physically escorted off of her job simply because some white woman was afraid of her. This is like the nicest, most mild Black young lady you would meet, but this white woman as a child even was taught that you just need to say you're afraid of the Black person. And it doesn't matter if that Black person is a big Black man or a Black woman, just the Black skin. I'm allowed to say I'm afraid and people are going to believe me, and that's that. So those are the kinds of things. And when
Yeah.
people share with you their experience of them, you need to receive it and not
Well,
try to rationalize it.
yeah, thank you. That, and also give me a moment to, like, carefulness, right? Like, not, just being so careful that we're stiff and inauthentic, right? So you see me with my white friends, I'm relaxed, I'm open, there's all this bonding going on, and then I get really careful around you. There's a lot of subtle way I think white progressive people have to understand that anti-Blackness is so deep within the culture that we've all absorbed it. And so at a fundamental level, I have been taught to see you, okay, forgive me, I'm going to talk really direct here in this way, as not intelligent, not inherently qualified, that there isn't any way you could have the position you have unless you got it for some special thing. If all these things are operating within me at the same time that I must deny that they are, they're going to come out in ways that I'm going to undermine you every step of the way, and you can never call me on it. You can't get your hands on it, but it's going to come through because I fundamentally don't see you as valuable as myself and as other white people. And I'm just talking about the way I was trained. If we don't challenge that, it's just running rampant.
Can I take it a step further?
Of course.
I think that we need to recognize that Black people are not seen as fully human.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have the emotional responses. We are not, doctors say we don't need medication. If racism ever saved us, it saved us from the opioid epidemic because they thought we were lying about the pain. Of course, you're not in pain, you just want drugs. So for once, racism served the
Wow.
Black community well. But yeah, and I think that's where we need to get to the point where we can talk about, are we seen as fully human? And I'm not here to prove to you that I'm human. I just want, and I think white people need to understand that just because Black people don't call you on your BS, it doesn't mean we don't see it. We just don't call you on it. It's not worth the argument, but I think there's an assumption. But then as Black people, I want us to learn how to call people on their BS, because otherwise you give people a reason to pretend that they don't know that they've hurt you, offended you, or whatever the case may be. So we need to get better at that. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, and I think that white people need to see that as an incredible gift that you just gave, no matter how you give it, no matter how you tell me that I'm stepping on your neck. You can tell me that any way you need to tell me that. And that there's no offense to me. Again, that is across a history of harm, across a relationship of power, you're willing to risk what you risk in order to tell me that. I need to appreciate that. I mean, can you just imagine? I'll never forget asking a room full of people, it was mixed race, and I said, how often have the Black folks in the room given a white person feedback on our inevitable and often unaware racism, and had that go well for you? And the room laughs. Even white people laugh, like, and they say things like, never, one time, I'll never forget, it went well. And I said, well, what would it be like if you could just tell us, and had us receive it with grace, reflect, and seek to change the behavior? What would that be like? And I'll never forget, this Black man raised his hand. He said, that would be revolutionary. And I thought, wow, like, revolutionary is a really strong word, right? And it would be revolutionary that we would, again, receive the feedback with grace, reflect, and seek to change the behavior. On the one hand, that's how difficult we are. That's a revolution. But on the other hand, that's not that tall of an order, is it? I mean, it's a tall order from the current paradigm that says, I could never be racist. If you change that paradigm, that's not a tall order. And the impact that would have on the length of your life, with the stress-related diseases and things, from you saying what you just said, which is most of the time it's easier to just take it home. I'm not going to bother, but you're still, it has an impact on you, right? That's why
I'm so glad you mentioned stress. I plan to do some work around working while Black, and there are experiences that we have in the workplace that, not to say that other people don't have them, because they do, but I think when you're Black and having these experiences, we have fewer resources to secure workable recourse for us. And we find ourselves in these, lots of Black people suffer from stressful conditions, high blood, cancer, diabetes. So you deal with this frustration at work, in the workplace for 8 hours. Most of us spend most of our time in the workplace. And when you don't deal with it, it manifests inside your body. And, maybe you stop on the way home and have too much to drink, maybe you go home and you beat your wife, you beat your kids, whatever. But rather than dealing with what's happening to us in the workplace. So I really want us to start talking about that, and not just amongst us as Black people, but white people. I remember being at a SHRM event conference, and we were talking about the whole DEI situation. And people are talking about it like it's some out of body experience. Like, no, everybody in this room is in a position to, you're in a position of authority. You can influence and implement change in your organization, but everybody's talking about this, this whole, diversity and anti-Blackness and what, as though they're talking about somebody else. And a part of doing the work is looking in the mirror and recognizing that, what, I am the American, they have this thing called American descendants of slaves, but we also need to look at the American descendants of slave owners. They're that they're just as we're still traumatized and affected by some of that, white people are affected by having been you owned people for a long and treated us horribly. And and it is manifested in who you are. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, don't apologize. I'm thinking about the concept of weathering is what we're talking about, right? Weathering, um, which is just the wear and tear from the chronic racial stress, right, of living in a racist society,
Yeah,
right? In which
absolutely.
So, the situation we're in now, right? For me, what it illustrates is how powerful the forces that kind of control the power of white supremacy. I'm just going to say it, how powerful it is. So folks in DEI work for decades now have been trying to get into the mainstream concepts like systemic racism and white supremacy. And of course, we're not talking about the KKK. We're talking about a system that holds white people up as the human norm, a system that tells me that you're less human, right? White supremacy. We live in that system. And the summer 2020, finally, those concepts got into the mainstream. So I'm going to backtrack and say, God, for people like me, maybe 2 decades, but Black folks have been writing and speaking for centuries on these concepts. Okay, so let's be clear about that. And finally, it got in the mainstream, right? So people began to have a framework that challenged this simplistic notion, right, of good people versus bad people. 4 years later, it's only been 4 years, and it's literally illegal to teach these concepts in public schools in at least 17 states. And I'm pretty sure that if the election goes the way I fear it will go, it will be federally illegal. Black history will be illegal. That's how powerful those who really control the society are. And I think it was a bit threatening 2020, right? And coupled with white apathy set in, right? It was a really interesting conversation. All the book clubs were reading the books. It was in everywhere you went. It was, I'm sorry to say it, it was like it was in to have this conversation. And then as soon as it wasn't put in front of white people's faces anymore, and if you really understand that it requires something of you ongoing, you're not officially an ally now because you went to some book groups in 2020. That is kind of like the apathy set in, coupled with, I think, the power. You've got both those dynamics going on.
Let me ask you something. So I was trying to find a stat for you that I shared with you, and I have to admit I've just been so busy. So I told you that when I was also at this SHRM event, they indicated that 80% of the people who were working in DEI were white. And I said, yeah, but 90+% of the people who are affected by it are not white. So where is the sincerity? So my question to you is, we did all these cosmetic things, and we had the conversations, we joined the book clubs, we had the conversations or what have you. Was there a sincerity? And when people, particularly minority people, were put in these positions, do you think it was a setup for failure? like, was there ever some real commitment to address this issue, or was it just put a Band-Aid on it, make them think that people were giving money like crazy. If you were a Black organization, you got money coming from everywhere. So I don't know, how would you gauge the sincerity?
Is this going to sound maybe like an odd juxtaposition, but it feels like a superficial sincerity, right? Like on the surface level, it feels sincere, but again, because everything around me is talking about it and saying it's good, and there are rewards for doing it, and it's good for business to be able to say we're doing it. And then when that goes away, there's not really a deep commitment there, right? So it's like a superficial performance. And often, let's face it, the people that are pushing it are whoever is on those diversity committees. I find it hard to believe that 80% are white. There may be more white people than there should be. But what I have found is usually this is the work they automatically assign all the people of color, right? Like, you do the race work, we'll do everything else. So I'm not really sure what the actual demographics are, but nonetheless, yeah, I mean, bottom line is profit. Bottom line is, companies making money. And so why bother if society has made it easy for them not to bother, right? Because now they can say, well, gosh, it's too controversial. Companies are getting sued. I actually just got served at the white privilege conference. Do you all know about the white privilege conference? It's going to sound like a really weird, like all conferences are white privilege conferences, aren't they? No, this is Dr. Eddie Moore is a Black man who founded this conference about 25 years ago. And it's really excellent. I go every year. I've gone for the last, say, 15 years, and I happen to get served because a white man is suing the city of Seattle for racial discrimination and racially hostile work environment because of their race and social justice initiative. A very powerful far-right forces are backing him. And so those kinds of things are scaring organizations. So it's probably simplistic to say it's one single thing. But when you put it all together, it's not going to hold, and it isn't holding.
Yeah, it is. There's so much happening around there. Can we take a quick look at the chat of,
Well, I saw a question in there I'd love to answer. Just for a second,
please,
came
go
up,
right
and
ahead.
it was, do I believe Black people are racist?
Yeah, I saw that.
All right. No. So you ready, everybody? And if this goes on YouTube and this one is the one that gets taken out of context, then I'm going to get all the death threats, and I get anyway, but they go up and down. I believe all white people are racist. And when I say that, I mean all white people have been conditioned into a racist worldview. There may be white people listening right now saying, I am not racist, but I'm not talking necessarily at a conscious, intentional level. There's simply no way that you could not have absorbed racism and anti-Blackness. We've all absorbed it. Ibram Kendi says, we may not be the producers of racist ideology, but we've all been the consumers. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say all white people have a racist worldview. Now, you can have bias against white people, but you don't have the legal authority and institutional control to infuse that bias across the fabric of the entire society. But white people do. Okay, so I don't use racism to talk about your bias. You might automatically not like any white people, right? You just like, I don't like white people. That's bias. But we have to reserve some language for the profundity in difference between you not liking white people and me not liking Black people. And what is backs my entire group's bias. So racism is talking about at the collective level. Okay, so can Black people collude with racism? Yes. Can they help it along? Clarence Thomas, right? I mean, I kind of made a joke there, but Clarence Thomas is a great example. Okay. But who does it serve when Clarence Thomas, he's not supporting racism, blacks towards whites. He's supporting white racism towards black people. So Ibram Kendi says that black people can be racist. So sometimes, I've stood side by side with Ibram Kendi, and we both understand what each of us means. And I would hope people wouldn't get hung up on that difference. Whatever works for you, just take it and run with it, okay? He says black people can be racist, and he means it in the sense that Clarence Thomas can absolutely uphold racism, right? Tim Scott can uphold racism. But it's still always the racism that serves white supremacy.
Yeah, those
So
people
I
have
just
they've
Go ahead.
internalized white supremacy.
Yeah.
And it's to their personal gain, not at all and detrimental to the collective black people. So
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with women. Can women collude in sexism? Can women tear other women down? Can women tear themselves down? Yes, but could women as a group literally deny men their civil rights? No, why not? Because our whatever you want to call it, bias isn't backed with legal authority and institutional control, but men's is. Right. So I just reserve some language to capture that difference. And so the ism words I save them for the dominant group.
Yeah, it's definitely a power thing, like you said, non-white people cannot like or be prejudiced or what have you, but I can't stop you from getting a job. I'm not going to stop you from being able to um when you get stopped by the cop, you're going to have a different experience than I'm going to have. Um, I'm trying to look at the chats real quick while I don't know where my co-hosts are. Are you guys seeing anything that we just need to
Yes,
ask?
Helen, I saw a couple of questions.
Go ahead, read them off, or the person if they want to say it themselves, they can. But go ahead, Kilthea. What do you see?
Okay, so if Mary Jane Leland is still here,
That is my law school buddy, MJ. Are you here? Mary Jane, if you are, can you come off mute, please?
Yeah,
she had a couple questions.
yeah, I'm here.
MJ, go ahead. What's your question, babe?
Well, I don't know. I had a couple of questions. Now I don't remember what they are. Something
Okay,
about
I can, I have your
Help her
question.
along, Kilthea.
I have them. She asked for examples of punitive, punishing, angry behavior. She also asked, how do we, let me see if I can read my own writing. How can,
yeah, how do we know if we're evolved?
or are we
Evolved we are.
defensive? Yes. Okay.
I would just assume that you're involved and then spend your focus trying to figure out how, right? So I often put it like this. Change the question from if I'm a part of this to how am I a part of this?
Excuse me, it's not involved, it's evolved. She wants to know if she's evolved. Yes. Sorry.
Isn't that amazing how that changes okay. How do I know if I'm evolved?
Or how evolved I am, yeah. Or how
okay,
how do I know how evolved I am?
I would say that and I don't know you, so I'm just going to talk in general terms, how one would know, one who is white, is do you live an integrated life in some way, not just one friend, but you have a somewhat diverse friendship circle. So you lead an integrated life. I actually don't think white people who have no black people in their lives can actually evolve, if you will. Okay. So do you lead an integrated life? Do you talk about race and racism with your black friends? Have they ever given you any kind of feedback? And if not, actually, that could be a red flag. Or if they did once, but they never did again, that could be a sign that you didn't respond well and they gave up, right? So it's kind of, what are your relationships like, and what do you talk about, and what do you struggle with together in those relationships. This seems like we have a lot of Black women on this call. This seems like a great question to
Let me go on gallery view
put
real
out
quick.
to the, like, what tells you that a white person is further along than maybe others? No, we're never have arrived, but what do you look for in a white person that tells you that they may be an ally, that you might
Good
be able to
question.
trust them?
And I don't need to answer that. I'm going to take you off spotlight, MJ. Love you. She and I went to law school together. We got stories, and we do have conversations. You know, that's one thing that you said. If we are friends and we're having open and honest conversations, but I'm going to bring on the ladies who did this play called Dissonance, because you got to see
Oh,
this
yeah.
play. It's powerful. So I'm plugging it big time for them. And they are a Black woman and a white woman who wrote this play. And inherent in the play are conversations that, even though we're good friends with one another, there are things that we kind of like don't know about each other. And you got to see this play. I'm going to bring them on and give them a shameless plug. But Black woman, anybody who wants to answer that question, what are you looking for from white women that says you're my ally? Anybody want to take that on? I can call folks out, but
I'll jump in. I'll jump in there.
who
Hello,
is that?
everyone. My name is Crystal Mitchell. I'm the co-director of Recycling Black Dollars.
So if my co-host can help me and bring her on screen, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead, Miss Mitchell.
Okay.
What?
So, you know, I grew up in a mixed race environment, and we were all just people. We just had conversations. We enjoyed each other. Race was, I knew that they were Italian. They knew I was Black, but it wasn't anything that, there were none of the microaggressions. They understood. I became godparents to some of their children. Their children saw me as auntie, and vice versa. Those are people who have actually integrated you into their lives, and you integrated them into your lives. And race, your color just happens to be what your coat is. But you as a person, when we lost loved ones, we commiserated with each other. When there were births, we celebrated with each other. We went to weddings together. We traveled together. Race never actually was part of a conversation. Those are the people I think that you can say have evolved, right? They don't see it. Maybe it was the way we all grew up in a mixed environment, and so we didn't see it. And when we had conversations, or when I was hurt because of something that was particularly racist, they actually understood, and they had empathy for me. And in some cases, they fought for you. In my opinion, that is a person who has evolved. You don't see the color of the person's skin in its a higher essence, not the fact that you don't have skin color. Those people that say I don't see color, yeah, you do see color, but that it didn't, underneath that coat, I was, I have bone, I have marrow, I have blood, I bleed blood, I cry when I'm sad, when I'm elated, I laugh. Those are the women I think, or the people I think that are evolved.
Exactly.
I would say this is Mirva Cadet.
Miss Mira.
I will speak in the manner of which I've experienced it a little bit. And I think of two specific occasions. One, when I've challenged something, and I've challenged whiteness with a white person, and they were offended, and felt some type of way, but then took the time to reflect and then came back to say, you know, I got offended. I didn't even really understand where that feeling was coming from. I had to go back and reflect. And then we were able to have a conversation around the issue. That to me felt a little bit of emerging and evolving just a little bit. And another time I've experienced it as well was another time I'm challenging white supremacy in some manner. And almost everybody white in the room shut down and got very offended. And so I stopped being in the mood to fight, and I stopped speaking. And a white person used their privilege to bring back the conversation, point out how everybody got offended when a Black woman was challenging something, and reopen the conversation and asked me to continue speaking, and kind of made everybody come back to the conversation. So that to me is a little bit of evolving. being able to recognize the privilege and the power that they have, and actually using it to continue setting space and creating a safer space for conversations to happen that needed to happen.
Exactly. Thank you. Good point. Well, she makes me think of an example that Linda always gives. You remember the lady that climbed the flagpole?
Yeah,
Linda? Yeah,
yeah.
tell us.
I was gonna talk about that. That was like, to me, there was a young lady who was climbing the flagpole in South Carolina to take down the Confederate flag. And to me, that was the best example of evolving. There was a white attorney who, even though this group, it was a whole group of people who planned this, and they're very strategic and very tactical about how they're going to do this, because they knew it would be, some pushback. And after she climbed it, the white attorney who was with the group that she was affiliated with, he noticed that the police were getting ready to electrocute that pole. And he just went and grabbed the pole as a white man. He grabbed the pole because he knew, if he didn't know before, he knew that if he was a white man, grabbed that pole, those police officers would not have electrocuted that pole. And to me, that was the best example of someone saying, if he didn't know before, he knew the risk he was taking by doing it. But I think he probably felt that his risk was less than hers. So that was a good example. Ellen, if it's okay, I have to get ready to go. And I had like 3 questions that I wanted to direct.
Very quick, Linda. Go
Well,
ahead.
they're on the chat. One is, I wanted to know, and let me kind of get in here because there's music in the background where I'm at. I wanted to know if Dr. DiAngelo had ever considered, what was I going to say? Ever considered the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery, aka manifest destiny, which was rebuffed by the Pope last year in March. And the doctrine basically says 4 things for those who don't know. It said, wherever white people go, it belongs to them. Second, that they're superior to everybody else. Third, you must be subjugated by them. And fourth, you must accept their religion. That was one part. The second part, real quick, and you can merge this if you want to, I don't care. The second part is, and I sent Dr. Wait a minute, it's Joy DeGruy. If you don't know who she is, Joy DeGruy was actually the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and her mentor is Edwin J. Nichols, and he did this whole thing on the philosophical aspects of cultural differences. And I wanted to know if Dr. DiAngelo was familiar with that. And the last thing had to do with the fact that, have you included in your work, because I don't know, have you included in your work the fact that there's no such thing as race? And, what kind of response have you gotten from white people if you've included that in your work? Like, this is an artificial construction, a social construction. And, many people don't know because it's sort of academic. So I wanted to know if those were topics that you had included in your work. And if not, would you include? And if you have, what kind of reaction, if any, have you gotten from white people once they understand that race is artificial?
Sure, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I always include that there's no such thing as race at the biological level, but that is a social construct. It is profound in its impact, right? The response often is wanting to grab on to see there's no such thing as race and then move that into a colorblind kind of thing. So let's not talk about it. So that's why I have to push back and say, no, but as a social idea, I mean, you could literally predict whether my mother and I were going to survive my birth because of my race. And we can predict how long I'm going to live because of my race, because I am white. It's so profound in its consequence, right? So by emphasizing those 2 things, it's not real biologically, so that can help get rid of these ideas of less human, less intelligent, less pain, those horrible ideas that come out of manifest destiny, but also it's profound in its meaning and we have to take account of it. And a thought I had when I was listening is there's a Black woman named Pat Parker. And Pat Parker says, first, forget that I'm Black. And I think what she means by that is stop reducing me to that, stop having me only speak to that, or, and second, don't you ever forget that I'm Black. I have a different experience than you do. I have a different reality. And I feel like that's the balance, right? Like to not have reduce you to that as if it's all that you are and all you can speak to, but also never to forget that it fundamentally changes your experience in the world from mine, in ways that we have to change and challenge. And I do know Joy DeGrew's work.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And Dr. Nichols, I'm a little rusty on, although I know I back in the day, I studied.
So I see we had two hands up and now we have one. Kilthea, what's your question?
Thanks. So there are two questions. One, okay, I'm not sure that I got this right or that I understand it. Tara Skinner, if she's still here, asked about the weaponization of white women's tears. And the second question is a question of my own. I've, early on done, a fair amount of work in this area, but if you could speak to the issue of fatigue and giving up, so there's a lot of ways in which I see people who work in this field, it's just so grueling and so exhausting and so disappointing. I've seen white people, there was a white guy on the job and he was a great ally and, really spoke out against racism in the workplace. But I think after a while, he just got tired and he gave up. And, and myself, I had a very, very close friendship with a white woman. But, after things kind of went sideways, I kind of gave up. And it's just really, one of my criteria for having white women as friends is, do you already have Black friends? I don't want to be your first Black friend.
Can I ask you, because are you Black?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'm asking because the way that I answered that, I actually think this concept of fatigue or giving up or hope is the answer is different based on for you versus for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'd like you to speak to both sides because
Yeah.
white women here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll start with the fatigue question, and then we'll go to the women's tears question.
Okay.
I don't want to cast aspersions on your friend, the white man who gave up, but I would have to say that when he gave up, who did that serve? It doesn't serve you, but in a way it does serve us. So that I think of it as terms of hope and hopelessness. And I can tell you, do I struggle with hopelessness? Please, yes. And I know that as a white person, I cannot succumb to it because that's basically perfect. White person, feel hopeless, give up and do nothing, and everything stays the same, which ultimately benefits you, right? And so I can't allow myself to go there. For you as a Black woman, that's a whole nother thing, right? And I don't feel like it's my place to say. I think hope is political for those reasons. That the outcome is different, and you've got to survive and hopefully thrive, and whatever helps you do that is an empowered choice that you're making. That's how I think about it.
Thank you.
Weaponization of white women's tears. Sometimes I worry that people take that, because there's a chapter in White Fragility where I say white women's tears, and it's not that white women cannot cry or should not cry. I wonder if sometimes Black women aren't looking at us going, why are your hearts not breaking? Right? Like, how can you be so cold, right? You don't seem moved. You're bearing witness to my experience and I don't see you moved. And that hurts, right? So it isn't that we can't cry, but it's that, why are we crying? When are we crying? How are we crying? And what is the impact of our tears on those around us? And we have to be attentive to that, right? We've been conditioned to protect white women. All of us have, right? Ideal womanhood is white womanhood. And whether you kind of want to or not, if I start crying, you know that actually it's a little dangerous for you. So you might want to soothe me and protect me. And if I just drink that up, I just take all that energy everybody's giving, then I am sucking that energy out of there. Then I think that's problematic. So it's kind of, what are you crying about? How is it affecting other people? But if you shared a really heartbreaking experience that you had, and I shed some tears, but I didn't make a big scene over it, I imagine you might appreciate that. If I've been moved to tears in conversations, but I cry quietly, and if people start comforting me, I make sure they know I'm okay. I'm okay.
I'm not,
I
I
don't
wasn't
need
asking
anything.
that question. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I wasn't asking that question in terms of white women being moved to tears by our experience, more as white women weaponizing their tears to gain from their experience.
Thank you. And I think my point was that there's a time and a place. But if it is not that time and that place, then what that does is it rallies all the resource onto the white woman. It puts her as needing to be protected from this, whatever it was that supposedly threatened her, which is likely going to be you. And in that way, it can be a form of weaponization, right? Conscious or not, that's how it functions. I think that the Cooper, the woman in the park with the dog, is such a classic example of a white woman who knew perfectly well what her tears were expected to do. It was a kind of a rare situation that it didn't work, but Christopher Cooper,
only because it was recorded.
yeah,
Yes.
Christopher Cooper might have died that day, and she knew that. And she made a point of it, of saying that. So that for me is just a perfect visual of the weaponization of white women's tears. So I hope that speaks to it, Tara.
Perfect.
Okay.
The other side of that, though, excuse me, what came to my mind when I was listening to your book was the other side of that perfect court scene where the female officer had killed the black man in his own house, and at court started crying. And so there's that, like you said, that kind of mobilization to try and comfort white women. And, even his brother, can I give her a hug? And then the judge, can I give her a Bible? It just
was horrible.
It's like, how can this be that this woman killed your brother in his own home, minding his own business, and now that she's crying, you want to, go and comfort her? But
well, this is a little bit of a stretch into another thing, but Ron DeSantis, like anti-woke law, nothing should make somebody feel uncomfortable. Who are they talking about? They're talking about your comfort. They're talking, those are basically white fragility laws, right? That no white person should ever feel discomfort. And if they do, something's wrong. Nobody's looking at your pain, right? Yeah. So just because of time, I'm at my endpoints. What if we take?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
We're going to do there's a few hands that have been up, and we're going to do that, and we're going to let you go if you don't mind.
Okay.
Somebody help me, Dr. Lisa. I can't see the hands anymore. It was Dr. Lisa from Chicago.
Hi, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Question. I was thinking you were asking the question around allyship, and when have we had times as Black women experience it, especially in the workplace? And I thought about it and I thought, well, I've had pockets of it, but I'm wondering, has anyone in your field studied, I'm just going to name it, intermittent allyship, where you get it in one area, but you don't get it in the other areas? Whatever those areas could be or can be.
Not that I know of that I studied it, but just I really appreciate that you just laid that out. I think it's a great example of why this idea that I'm an ally is a false idea, because maybe I'm pretty good in this one place, but there's inevitably another place that I'm not good in, and I'm not paying attention to it. And that's what I hear you say,
Yes.
that there's an inconsistency there. And if we're not open to hearing about it, we're certainly not going to change it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to share while we're transitioning to Erica, you're next. Thank you, Miss Dr. Lisa. Thank you so much. An example of allyship is the same woman who told me she was walked off her job currently is in a position where a white woman believes in her and sees her as helping her flourish in her job. So luckily she landed well. And that's a way you show up as an ally. Erica, very quick, what's your question?
Hey, hi everyone, and sorry I'm off camera. I'm a little under the weather.
Okay.
I was going to respond to the question earlier about like when was there a moment where you had like a white friend who you felt was more involved. And I think one incident that I can remember vividly is one of my closest white friends was dating a Black man, and she came back and told me an instance where he was making comments about like not wanting to be with Black women, and he was pretty much complaining about Black women. And she asked me about like what did I think about that and what was my advice to her. And I told her, I said I would stop seeing him immediately, because it sounds like he's not dating you because he likes you, he's dating you because because you don't look like him. And she did. She ended it, and she's like, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. And she did, like, without question. And she like broke things off with him and told him, yeah, I have Black friends. I have Black people I consider family of mine. And that's not, it sounds like you have some issues within yourself that you need to resolve, because you're only with me because I'm not Black. And she did. And I thought that there was a moment where she could have sat in that white female fragility, but she didn't.
Right.
So
Or
that was a
to-
moment for me with her.
that's powerful, right? I mean, she could have also just like enjoyed like being special in his eyes and not shared that with you at all, right? So good friend.
That's another thing somebody added as an insult when they said when white folks will say, well, you're not like the others. Like that is not a compliment. Please don't say that. Very quickly, Miss B, go ahead. Because we want to let we're gonna let Robin go. Very quickly, please.
DiAngelo,
You're muted,
thank you.
Barbara. Barbara, you're muted.
Oh, Barbara. Okay.
All right.
Barbara.
Hi.
Hi.
I really apologize for being late, but in any event, I read your book several years ago, and it was funny. I was doing a presentation with a white woman, an Irish woman, who I would count as a good friend, and I count her as a good friend because A, she got me a job, B, she hired my daughter within her capacity on occasion. We have reached across the generations. I've helped out her children. She's helped out my children. So those are the things that I look for when I'm looking for, okay, is there a white person that I would consider to be my friend? And she is, even though I went to a high school where I was 16 out of over 600 girls, I was one of 16 Black girls in the school. Graduated from white schools. I didn't have my first Black professor until I was in graduate school. So my life in terms of my education and my career development has been predominantly white. I was listening to someone talk, and it just dawned on me that I have represented fewer Black people than as an attorney than I have white people, even though I do civil rights litigation. I think that your book, what stood out to me in your book was the fact that I thought this was a message that you should be delivering to white people. So I wanted to ask you, how many audiences have you had in your presentations that were predominantly white versus how many were mixed and how many were predominantly Black?
Yeah, well, I am clear in the book that I'm writing as a white person to white readers, and most of the
Yeah.
audiences are white. And to be honest, when I'm brought into a primarily Black organization, I'm always a little bit uncomfortable because it's like, I think you understand whiteness much more deeply than I ever will. You, from a very early age, you had to understand my reality. You had to navigate my reality. I've never had to understand yours. So most of my audiences are primarily white. Yeah.
And the reception that you get. I mean, I remember in your book you talked about some pushback that you had gotten, and I don't know whether you did more presentations before you wrote the book or following your writing the book, and people actually reading it, and I don't know how that's changed over time.
Well, before I wrote the book and was kind of famous for it. I did more workshops where you're interacting with people, and so you're dealing with their resistance more directly. After the book, then I did more just like a keynote talk where, you know, they're a captive audience. They have to hear what you have to say, and they really can't argue with you about it. It's not a small workshop. And I think that the popularity of the book gave me some credibility that allowed people to receive me better. Now, also, I'm just going to say this, I have had my home vandalized. I have had woke C word spray painted on my walkway. I have had death threats. I have had what's his name, Tucker Carlson and Fox News, you know, also with that fame came a lot of threats of violence, and so it comes at me in a really different format now than it used to, but it still comes, if that helps.
Yeah, I'm going
Yeah,
to
thank
I'm
you.
gonna move on. Miss Farnsworth, you had a question I wanted you to ask, please.
I did read your book, Robin, this week, and I learned so much from it, even though I have two biracial children in their 40s. There was a question I saw come up about how it affects the biracial children. Because I had one son that more identified with white, and the other one who more identified with Black, and I had to be his ally throughout because it was very challenging starting, you know, and I mean, my first child was born in 78, so can you speak to that, please?
I don't want to not speak to it, but it's so layered and complex. I don't feel that I can do justice to it. I do write a little bit about the biracial experience. I would recommend Angela Tucker's new book. She just wrote a book called You Should Be Grateful. It's a little bit different. She's a Black woman that was adopted and raised by white people. And there's actually a book called What Are You? Of youth, multiracial youth writing about their experience. So I would just direct you to that, just given time and given how sensitive a topic it is. So should we just
thank
take
you.
those? Sure, Michelle.
The other thing I was going to point out is that I have been trying to learn and study. I'm a quiet person with very few, hardly any friends. Most of the time, I'm a single working mom. But I always thought that I didn't have racial history because my parents are from Northern Maine. All my ancestors are from Maine. They even came to Maine in 1634. And I was like, oh, I have no connection. But then I learned how shipbuilders and merchant marines were connected. I've learned so much, and I'm continuing to learn. And for some reason, I hadn't picked up your book before, but it was enlightening. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farnsworth. Okay, go ahead, Miss Dr. DeAngelo. Go ahead, Robin.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Should we take Bri? Is it Bri?
Yeah, Laura
thank
and
you.
Michelle, they are my co-hosts, so we really shouldn't be so be very quick, please, so we can get her, we can let her go. Please be brief.
Just very quickly, Dr. DiAngelo, thank you so much. Your talk was really affirming. My question is, do you see white women voting for Kamala Harris if she's on the slate?
Oh, I'm going to be honest. My mouth hangs open that we could have Donald Trump actually even be this close to winning. I don't understand it. I don't know what to tell you. I hope white women vote for Kamala. It's such a clear choice, and yet look, it's highly likely that Trump is going to win. So I actually am at a loss. I really am.
That's one of the questions that Kilthea had she didn't ask, because you're writing this book during the Trump's first term. Did that impact So you're writing the book, or you were just
No,
already
not directly,
writing?
because it was coming from an article of it a lot earlier, and it was really just trying
Gotcha.
to map out, whiteness. Is
Okay,
Michelle
Michelle,
allowed?
very, very quickly, very, very
Sure, it was
quickly.
just, thank you. So just as a result of your book, I was wondering, do you think that we've moved the needle forward toward better relations between the races? And if so, how do you measure that?
Ooh, I am really sorry to say, I think that we've backtracked. I really do. I think that white supremacy is so deep and so embedded and so well protected, and I think it got threatened in a way, and that it came back with a roar. I don't think I'm naive, but I actually didn't think we could be at this place at this point. And when you think about the civil rights movement of the 60s, and most of that has been undone, it's stunning. So I think maybe there are individual folks who have maybe some increased skills and awareness, right? I mean, and when you ask, how do you measure it? I have a friend who I always say, I hope you can tell that they read the book. In other words, if I can't tell that you have been on this journey, then what's the point, right? It's got to go beyond just, I got some insight. And lots of folks shared, and I hope people read in the chat, because lots of people put in the chat what they're looking for in white people they consider to be allies. And notice that most of it is action oriented, right? So that they're actually different out in the world. So I'd like to think it almost had too much of an effect. And look where we are.
Yeah. It forced people to.
Yeah, I was raised to think about history as this arc of progress. And it should just be really clear that this is history. And they've really jerked it over here. So we just got to keep going. Right? It's an incredibly adaptive system. It can adapt to challenges. It does adapt to challenges. Look how it adapted to the challenges of 2020. So we cannot be complacent. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you, everybody.
We are. We're gonna
thank you.
Thank you so much for hanging out and coming with us. I'm going to ask everybody else to kind of stay on the line for a few more minutes, and I'll talk to you about what's coming up. But let me take us off of remove the spotlight for myself. You have been wonderful. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
And let me ask everybody to unmute and do what we do when we close out, so we can show Dr. Robin what we do. And I want Carrie and Marcy, if you all can hang around, I'm going to talk to you a bit before we close off. So thank you again so much for coming. I appreciate your time. I look forward to talking to you again. And if ever you need to collaborate with us or need our support for something, please do not hesitate. So on that note, when Black women gather,
amazing
things happen.
And this has been another amazing afternoon. And I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. DeAngelo.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Happy Saturday.
If you can hang on, okay, I'm trying to find the stop recording somewhere. Okay.